What's it really like to live in Belize as an expat? We'll tell you in just a minute. Hi, I'm Kathleen Petticord.
I'm Lief Simon.
Welcome to a new episode of our Live and Invest Overseas podcast. We talked last time about how Belize stands out right now more than ever as a top choice for living or retiring overseas. It's a great place to be during a crisis, like, say, a global pandemic. Belize stands out as a place where you can live well on very little and enjoy a wide open, lots of elbow room, low density experience. And right now that comes with a lot of, that's a big advantage in our current world. But nowhere is perfect, including Belize. There are pluses and minuses, ups and downs to life in Belize. And Belize, I'd say, has more than its fair share of what you might think of as quirks about life.
Right, and we tell stories at the conference. The expats who speak at our conferences in Belize talk about different things. But one thing we talk about in Belize, the language is English, but it's also not English. So there's a lot of Spanish spoken. Belize is surrounded by Spanish-speaking countries. So much, if not all, of Belizeans are bilingual. But in fact, they're trilingual because there's a Cajun English that they speak. That if they see that you're not from Belize, they will switch to more formal, proper English, although not quite that formal. So if you want to, get in with the locals, you have to pick up on this.
This kind of a creole. It's a
right.
kind of a creole, very, very specific to Belize, though,
right.
And very fun to listen to. It's very fun.
So don't worry if you're hearing a form of English that you don't quite understand. They all do speak English, and we'll switch to English that you can understand when they're engaging you directly. Another thing in Belize is that they're quite literal. So one expat friend of ours talks about coming to an event one time and saying, "Oh, does that microphone work over there?" And the answer was, "Yes, it works." So she went and got the microphone, turned it on, and tried to use it, but it didn't work. She went back to the guy and said, "Well, I thought you said this worked." He said, "Oh, it works, but it needs batteries." So you have to phrase your questions in a way to make sure that you get the full answer that you're looking for much of the time when you're talking to a Belizean.
Another thing that I find kind of charming, but I guess in practice it could be very frustrating as well, is, for example, you can go into a shop, a little hardware shop in Cayo, which is the middle of the country, in a little town, and see on the shelf 3 cans of paint, all the same size, all the same make of paint, all the same color of paint. Each one has a different price. One is $5, one is $10, one is $15. Now, why would the same can, the same size of the same paint, have such dramatically different pricing, you might wonder, as we have wondered over the years? We finally came to realize, well, the can that's $15 is full. That's a full gallon of paint. The can that's $10 is a little more than half full, and the can that's $5 has a little bit left in the bottom.
Right. So I don't know, I didn't grow up in the 50s in the U.S., but I kind of feel like that's very similar to what might have happened in a small town hardware store in the middle of the U.S. back in the 50s, is that, Joe down the street, bought a gallon of paint, but he only needed half of it to finish painting his white picket fence. So he brought it back to the store and got a credit, and the store owner goes to resell
Put it back on the shelf.
So, right. And so in one way, it's great because not much goes to waste in Belize, and the store owners and the people are very flexible from that kind of perspective. But it requires you to ask questions to make sure you're getting what you think you're getting, or paying for what you think you're getting when you're in the store.
Another quirky thing is you might find, and this would happen to everyone, I imagine, when you show up in Belize as a newcomer, asking for directions. How might that go? If I asked you, how do I get to my friend Phil's house from here?
Right. There's a video, again, that one of our expat speakers has shown of a little girl giving directions to her friend's house down the road. And the girl's maybe 8 or 9 years old, so not very tall. And she starts out pointing like this and this and this in the video. And by the time that she's done giving directions, her arm is stretched up. She's on her tippy toes and making the final directional there. But never does she ever say left, right, or anything else. She go like this, you go like this, you go like this, you go like this, you go like this.
Or name streets.
And there's no streets to be named. And that's not uncommon in much of Central America. There's it's everything is directional, or where the old oak tree used to be.
Right.
And so you have to know, if you're not from there, you don't know where the old oak tree
Henry's
used to be.
Barn. But Henry died 20 years ago,
Right.
but it's still known as Henry's Barn, and that's where you turn left.
Right. So directions can be a little bit frustrating at times. And it's not just the little girl. I remember stopping with Phil once in Spanish Lookout and asking a Mennonite directions to someplace that Phil didn't know directly. And he got the exact same, well, you go like this, and you go like this, and you go like this. Although that guy was tall, so his arm never got way over his head. But that's how they give directions.
Right. Some more practical I wouldn't call those things downsides. I would call them quirks, and I find them charming. For me, this is what Belize is about. Belize is just the whole country is a small town. And that is a very, I find, appealing way of life, especially right now with everything going on in the world. Doesn't that just sound like a wonderful way to be living right now? Putting all the worries and the chaos of the world aside and just focusing on your local life with your friends and your neighbors and your community. But there are some more practical downsides, legitimate downsides to Belize. One would have to do with infrastructure. That's not Belize's strong suit.
Right. Belize is a small country of about 350,000 people. It has 3 highways, if you will call them that, north, west, and south, although the south one has a different name, and another one.
Hummingbird Highway.
Well, Hummingbird is now being paved and connecting to the other one is being paved anyway. So now there's actually 4, because I do think the one that was dirt.
And see, we're confused because now there's a 4th highway,
right.
4th road in Belize.
There's a 4th highway that I believe has been paved in the last couple of years, but we didn't make it to Belize this year because of the pandemic. But they're basically 2-lane roads that run through town, and you couldn't even call it Route 66 in the U.S. where Route 66 went through every town. There are speed bumps in the middle of the road, sometimes not where you would think they should be. There's houses and shops all along the road, even when you're not particularly in a town, especially the Western Highway going out to Cayo. And so you've got to be careful because there's all sorts of things around you. The roads don't go fast, but they are paved and they continue to improve them and make them better. But that also leads to having a car in Belize is expensive because of import duties, and gas taxes are high. And also the roads there are just, once you get off these main paved roads, a lot of times you're going to be on a fairly rough dirt road. And so they're hard on
your vehicle will take a beating.
Right.
So you need a car in Belize, and unless you're out on the island where you might have a golf cart or just walk everywhere. But if you're on the mainland, you'll need a vehicle, and you'll need a strong 4x4. Honestly, that's what you really need.
We would recommend. A lot of locals have cars.
They do, yeah. But I think you would want a 4x4, and you would need to be prepared for the fact that the cost of maintaining your vehicle could be the biggest line item in your budget, greater than your housing expense.
Right. Well, Tony just has a bike, so he gets around.
Our friend who lives in Cayo.
Right. Yeah. And so he doesn't have a car. He takes the bus into town or rides his bike into town. He's not that far from town.
Right. So it's possible to not have a car. So you can
get by without a car on the mainland, but if you want to go anywhere else in the country besides the town that you're living in, again, a car, for more freedom, a car is recommended, but it's going to cost.
Right, and so the cost of living overall in Cayo can be very affordable. You can rent something for maybe $300 a month at a minimum, and you could spend much more, of course. But you can rent at a reasonable or a very low cost. You can, grow a lot of your own groceries, a lot of your own food. So you can live on a very modest budget, with a couple of exceptions. One would be vehicle expense. Another would be gas, for example, connected to your vehicle expense, but gas tax is high in Belize.
And anything manufactured is imported, and import duties are high. So you're going to pay more for last year's model of computer or TV than you would for this year's model in the U.S., for example.
Right.
Which is why a lot of expats, when they travel back and forth, they bring back a fair amount of stuff with them, and so coming into the country, the customs people in Belize are used to this, and so they go through your luggage, and if you bring in more than you're allowed, you'll be charged something on that in bringing it into the country.
And that brings up import duties, which are high in Belize generally, and so that's one advantage of the QRP residency. In part 1 of this discussion of Belize, we talked about how it's possible to become a resident simply by showing up in the country and renewing your tourist visa for a year.
Right.
I can't imagine an easier, lower hassle way to become a resident of somewhere. But Belize offers another option that does require showing a minimum income amount, a monthly amount of guaranteed income, and that's its Qualified Retiree Person, QRP program. And the big advantage, I would say, of the QRP program is that you're allowed to bring your personal goods, household goods, and a car duty-free.
Right.
Or the country.
Buy a car in the country and have the duty removed from the sales price. But that's a one-time deal. So once you do that, and if you want a new computer or a new television, you're going to pay the
5 years later, for example. Yeah.
On the real estate side, your other big expense. So your car is likely to be one big expense, or your golf cart on the island. And real estate is going to, where you're living is going to be the other big expense. On the plus side, property taxes in Belize are practically nothing, and in fact, it could cost you more in gas to go pay them every year.
And is it possible to pay several years in advance?
That's what I recommend to people is go pay because one guy I spoke with years ago, his property tax was $10, and so go pay 10 years worth of property tax all at once, and
save yourself the time and the gas going back and forth,
and not have to think about it. Now, not everybody's property tax is $10, but it's much less expensive than you'll find anywhere in the U.S. and most of Central America as well. But you get what you pay for. As we said, the infrastructure isn't great in Belize, so low property taxes means there's not a whole lot of money going into infrastructure and other government services. On the downside for foreigners, Belize charges a surtax transfer duty right now it's 8%. So
on the purchase of property.
On the purchase of a property. So if you buy a property in Belize as a foreigner, you're going to pay 8% on top of all the other closing costs, just because you're a foreigner. You can look at that as prepaid real property taxes, since you're not really paying any property taxes year to year, and amortize that over the life of owning the property.
But it makes the point that Belize isn't a place to be. Imagine yourself buying and flipping property, or trying a property on by buying it and then deciding a year later, this isn't really where I want to be in the country. I'm going to sell and rebuy. While you're getting to know the place and deciding where specifically in Belize would be best for you, we would recommend renting, because buying and selling real estate is expensive, is costly.
Right.
And then on the list of downsides to Belize, or if you were making the pros and the cons list on a piece of paper, another point on the con side of your balance sheet would be healthcare, which again is not a strong suit in Belize, although improving.
Slowly improving, but still, like the local health insurance company offers a plan that covers you in Belize, Mexico, or Guatemala. So a lot of the locals have that plan, and they go over to Guatemala or Guatemala, Mexico, for anything that they can't get taken care of in Belize. But again, Belize is very close to the U.S., so flying back to Miami for something that's non-emergent is fairly straightforward.
And we've known expats, we've had friends who've had emergency medical procedures performed in Belize City, because they weren't able to opt to be flown to Miami, for example, because whatever the situation was needed to be attended to immediately. And in every case, it turned out fine, and they were happy with the care and the treatment. But, if you were diagnosed with a long-term illness, for example, you would probably want to seek care somewhere else.
Right, and the cancer treatments, one American doctor flies in, I think once a month or something like that. Last I spoke to the doctor who speaks at our events. And so it's there, but you're better off going back to the U.S. for that kind of treatment.
And so that brings up the point, at our Live and Invest in Belize conference, which in 2021 will be virtual, our Live and Invest in Belize virtual conference in February 2021, we'll have doctors and other health practitioners speak directly to this point, and we'll have experts on all these other topics that we're addressing: taxes, property purchase, residency, etc. So if you're interested in Belize, that really is your chance. And this year, it's your chance to do a deep dive with the help of expats and experts on the ground without having to invest the time and money in travel. You can do it from the comfort of your own living room, as it were. Right.
Although Belize is open for business. And, very limited restrictions once you land there. So if you're interested in visiting Belize, you can do so. But we made this conference virtual so that everybody can feel comfortable getting the information, and you can head down to Belize on your own whenever you're ready.
Thank you for listening. We'll leave it at that for today. We appreciate you tuning in for our Live and Invest Overseas podcast. Remember, you can sign up to receive them on our website, liveandinvestoverseas.com. We'll be in touch again soon. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.